The air up on the ridge was thin and bitter cold, biting through even the advanced camouflage gear the 4 soldiers wore. They moved not as 4 men, but as a single creature, a shadow sliding over the jagged rock. Their mission was over. For 5 days, they had watched the valley below, a lonely outpost guarding secrets. They had seen what they needed to see, taken the pictures, and sent the data. Now, they were going home. Got the leader, a man with calm eyes that missed nothing, held up a closed fist. The shadow behind him froze. He listened. There was only the wind, a constant low moan as it whipped across the stone, and the distant cry of a bird. It felt clean, empty. He gave a small hand signal, and they moved again, descending the narrow spine of rock known as the Razorback. It was the fastest way down, but there was no cover. A necessary risk. They called themselves Viper Team. They did not use their real names here. They were the Point Man, the leader, the medic, and the Comms Man. They trusted each other with their lives, a bond built on 1,000 silent moments like this one. The Point Man was first, his eyes constantly scanning the gray rocks ahead, looking for anything that didn't belong. The leader was second, making the decisions. The medic was third, and the Comms Man, with the heavy satellite radio on his back, was last. They had been on the move for 2 hours when the first snowflake landed on the leader's glove. He looked up. The sky, which had been a pale gray, was now turning a deep bruised purple. The wind's moan became a sharper whistle. A storm was coming in fast, rolling up the mountain like a silent, freezing wave. Within minutes, the world dissolved into a swirling white soup. The rocks under their feet turned slick with ice. The path, which was dangerous before, became a deadly slip and slide. We need to find shelter. Just until this passes, the leader said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Carried away by the wind, the Point Man nodded, leaning into the gale. They changed course, moving off the exposed ridge towards a cluster of larger boulders. It was a small ledge, protected from the worst of the wind. It would have to do. They huddled together, backs against the cold stone, trying to preserve their body heat. The world shrank to the few feet of rock they could see. They were ghosts in the storm, invisible. They felt safe in the noise and the white. That feeling was a trap. The enemy had not seen them. The storm had hidden their movement perfectly. But the enemy knew this mountain like the back of their hand. They knew every escape route. And they knew the Razorback was the only path down from the high peak. They had simply waited at the bottom of the choke point, a narrow gap between 2 giant walls of rock, where anyone coming down would have to pass through as the storm began to ease from a blinding whiteout to a heavy, misty snowfall. Viper Team moved again. They had to get off the mountain. They reached the choke point. The Point Man slipped through first, silent as a breath. The leader followed. The medic was halfway through when a rock, dislodged by his boot, clattered down the slope. It was a small sound, but in the sudden quiet of the easing storm, it was as loud as a gunshot. From above them, from positions dug into the rocks they thought were empty, muzzle flashes lit up the gloom. The sharp, echoing crack, crack, crack of rifle fire shattered the mountain silence. The first bursts were high, kicking up stone chips just over their heads. They were warning shots. Contact. Front and high. The Point Man yelled, already returning fire towards the shapes moving above. Back! Go back! The leader shouted. They turned to scramble back the way they came, but more gunfire erupted from behind them. They were in the middle. The enemy had them in a perfect L-shaped ambush. Bullets snapped past their ears, ricocheting off the stone with angry whines. The medic, as he spun to move, gave a sharp grunt and stumbled. A round had torn through his thigh. Bright red blood instantly stained the white snow on the rock. Man down. The comms man shouted, grabbing the medic's arm and hauling him backwards. There was no time to think, only to react. The leader and the point man laid down a furious blanket of fire, not to hit anyone, but to make the enemy duck. It was all about buying seconds. They half-dragged, half-carried their wounded teammate up the slope, away from the kill zone. They climbed, slipping on the ice, bullets chasing them, until they found it. A higher ledge, slightly bigger than the last. It was a terrible position, but it was defensible. They had the high ground, but they were trapped. Below them, they could hear voices calling out, see figures flitting between rocks. The enemy was moving, surrounding them, tightening the noose. The comms man got on the radio. Any station, this is Viper. We are under heavy fire. One man wounded. Our position is compromised. Static hissed back at him. The storm, now in the clouds above, was breaking up their satellite signal. The message was going out in broken pieces. The leader applied a tourniquet to the medic's leg. The man's teeth gritted against the pain. Hang tight, brother. We're getting out of here. But looking around, he knew the truth. They were on a tiny island of rock. Below them was a sea of enemies. Maybe 15, maybe 20. They had ammo, but not enough for a long fight. They had food and water for a day. The enemy had a mortar. They could see them setting it up on a lower outcrop. Once that was ready, this ledge would be a death trap. The cold was seeping into their bones. The gray afternoon light was already beginning to fade. The radio crackled again, a broken whisper from a world away. Viper, stand by. Send help. The message was unclear. Did command understand? Did they know where they were? Did they know how little time was left? On the ledge, the 4 men got into position. The point man and the leader took the front, looking down the slope. The comms man tried the radio again and again, his voice growing tighter with each failed attempt. The medic, his leg bandaged, propped himself up with his rifle, guarding their blind side. They shared a silent look. No words were needed. They would fight until the end. But in each man's heart, a cold seed of doubt took root, colder than the mountain air. The storm that had hidden them had also trapped them. And now, on this lonely peak, they were utterly alone. The call came in broken, like a voice from the bottom of the ocean. In the warm, dimly lit Joint Operations Center, 1,000 miles from the mountain, the words were just pieces of a nightmare. Viper, pinned down, 1 hurt, need help. Then, nothing. Just the hiss of dead air. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The low hum of computers and casual talk stopped. People sat up straighter. Eyes locked onto the main screen, a digital map showing a jagged, remote peak. A single blinking red light marked Viper's last known position. Around it, the screen showed nothing but angry swirls of green and white the storm. For the men in that room, Viper Team wasn't just a blinking light. They were faces. They were friends. A senior controller, a man with tired eyes from too many long nights, walked quickly to the main command desk. "Get me confirmation," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to hear his voice. Use every channel." Minutes ticked by. Each second felt like an hour. They tried again and again. Finally, another broken transmission came through. It was the voice of Viper's commsman, strained with effort. "We are on a ledge. Enemy has us surrounded. They have a mortar. We cannot move." That was all they needed to hear. The situation was clear, and it was as bad as it could get. A rescue plan started to form, but every standard option died as soon as it was suggested. A big helicopter assault? Impossible. The enemy was dug in and waiting for that. The weather was too bad, and the mountain was too exposed. It would be a death trap. Sending another team on the ground? They were days away. Viper team did not have days. They might not even have hours. The senior controller stared at the map, his mind racing over the terrain. He zoomed in on the peak next to Viper's position. It was slightly higher, separated by a deep, narrow gorge. On the map, it was marked with a small, sharp triangle and a code name, the Needle. A thought, a crazy, desperate thought, began to take shape. He turned to his team. "Who's the closest asset we have?" "Anyone." A younger officer scanned another screen. "There's a SEAL element wrapping up a training exercise about 50 miles southeast. They have an Air Force combat controller embedded with them." A combat controller. That was the key. These men were not just fighters. They were certified experts in calling in aircraft, guiding bombs, and talking pilots through impossible situations. They were a one-man Air Force. "Get me his file. Now." Picture came up on a screen. It was a man in his early 30s, with a steady gaze. His record was long and impressive. He was a sniper. He was a survival expert. He had top marks in mountain warfare. He was, on paper, the perfect tool for an impossible job. The senior controller picked up a secure phone. He spoke to the SEAL team's commander. The conversation was short and direct. "We need your combat controller. We have a team trapped on a mountain." "It's Viper." There was a pause on the other end. Then the answer came. "He's yours." "What's the plan?" The plan was simple. Too simple. We fast rope him onto the Needle. He climbs to the observation point. He finds Viper, marks the enemy, and guides an air support until we can get a bird in to pull them all out. Another long pause. The voice on the phone was cautious. "Sir, that's a one-way ticket if the weather doesn't clear. Or if the enemy is on that peak, too. Or if his rope gets stuck. Or if 100 other things go wrong." "I know," the controller said softly. "But it's the only ticket we have." Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Less than an hour later, the combat controller was in a helicopter, thundering through the dark valleys towards the storm. He had been pulled from a warm meal. He knew only the basics. A team was trapped, and he was going in alone to be their eyes. He checked his gear for the 10th time. A heavy, powerful rifle with a long-range scope. A survival kit. Extra ammunition. But the most important piece of equipment was his radio. It was big, with extra batteries, and a laser designator attached to it, a device that could shoot an invisible beam to mark a target for a jet's missile. He felt the familiar weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. It was a cold, focused feeling. There was no room for fear, only for the job. The pilots up front were the best, flying the helicopter so low he felt like he could reach out and touch the treetops. They were using the terrain to hide from radar and any enemy eyes. The voice of the senior controller came through his headset. "Guardian, this is JOC. The weather window is closing. You'll have one chance to get on the ground. The Needle is hot. We have no idea if the enemy is there. You ready?" The combat controller, whose call sign was Guardian, keyed his mic. "Jock, Guardian, ready." The helicopter shot up the side of a mountain, the engines screaming. The world outside was a blur of gray rock and speeding snow. Suddenly, the pilot's voice was tense in his ear. 30 seconds. It's gonna be rough." Guardian looked out the open door. The Needle wasn't a mountain. It was a giant, crooked tooth of black rock jutting into the clouds. The wind was whipping the snow into horizontal lines. There was no place to land. The pilot would have to hold the helicopter steady in the violent gusts, just long enough. He clipped his fast rope onto the anchor. A thick, braided nylon rope was pushed out the door, whipping wildly in the wind like an angry snake. The helicopter shuddered, fighting to stay in position. "Go, go!" The crew chief yelled, Slapping his shoulder, Guardian didn't hesitate. He grabbed the rope and stepped out into the roaring, freezing chaos. He slid down, the gloves heating up from the friction, the wind trying to tear him off. In seconds, his boots hit uneven, icy rock. He immediately unclipped and gave the rope a hard slap. The helicopter, released from its dangerous hover, banked away and vanished into the storm, the sound of its blades swallowed by the wind. Silence rushed in. A deep, heavy silence, broken only by the moan of the gale. He was completely alone. He looked up. The rock face above him was sheer and slick with ice. This was just the base. The real climb to the observation point at the very top was still ahead. He checked his rifle and his radio. Both were working. He took a deep breath of the thin, cold air and started to climb. Every handhold had to be tested. Every step had to be sure. One slip, and he would fall hundreds of feet. He wasn't just climbing for himself now. He was climbing for 4 men he had never met, who were waiting for a miracle on a ledge he couldn't even see yet. The only thing pushing him up that terrible rock was the thought of their voices on the radio, growing weaker with each passing minute. The climb was a slow, painful war against the mountain itself. Every inch was stolen from the ice and the wind. The combat controller, known only as Guardian, moved like a spider, feeling for cracks in the black rock with numb fingers, digging the toes of his boots into the smallest ledges. The storm had eased from a screaming fury to a constant groaning pressure, but it still shoved at him, trying to peel him off the face of the needle. He didn't think about the 4 men waiting. He couldn't afford to. Right now, his whole world was the next handhold, the next safe place to rest for 3 seconds. The rock was a nightmare. In some places, it was slick as glass with a thin layer of clear ice. In others, it was brittle and crumbled under his grip, showering little pieces down into the foggy abyss below. His muscles burned, first with fire, then with a deep, aching cold. The big radio on his back felt like it was filled with lead. Pulling him backwards an hour into the climb, he found a small, shallow crack in the rock. He wedged himself into it, just for a moment, to let his shaking arms recover. He pressed his face against the cold stone, breathing hard. This is where a man could make a mistake. This is where the tired mind could start to wonder if it was even worth it. He pushed those thoughts away. He took a slow drink from his water tube, the liquid already chilling in the hose. He thought of practical things, checking the small GPS unit strapped to his wrist. He was halfway up. He started moving again. The higher he got, the stranger the silence became. The wind was there, but it felt distant, like he was rising above it. The world below was a blanket of rolling gray cloud. He was entering a different place, a lonely kingdom of stone and sky. His focus was so absolute that he almost missed it. His head, turned to find the next grip, saw something flash in the corner of his eye through the mist below. A tiny, flat shelf of rock, jutting out from the immense wall of the neighboring mountain. And on it, little dark shapes that did not look like stones. He stopped dead, clinging to the rock. He slowly turned his head. There. It was them. His heart thumped hard once against his ribs. It wasn't relief he felt. It was a cold splash of reality. They were so small, so exposed. From this angle, looking down, he could see the whole terrible picture. The Viper team's ledge was smaller than it had looked on the map. It was a postage stamp on a cliff. The 4 dark shapes were pressed against the back wall. And below them, moving like ants, he could see the enemy. He counted. At least 15 men. They were spread out in good positions, covering every angle. And then he saw the worst of it. 2 men were crouched behind a large tube-like weapon on a flat rock. A mortar. They were fiddling with it, setting it up for the final blow. From their position, they could drop shell after shell right onto that tiny ledge. It was a matter of minutes now. Guardian didn't have minutes to spare. He had to get to the top. The needle's peak was just above him now, a jagged point against the dull sky. With a final, grinding effort, he hauled himself over the last lip and onto a small, uneven platform. This was it. The observation post. He immediately got to work. He was exposed here, a single man on a tooth of rock. He lay flat on his stomach, the cold of the stone biting through his gear. He pulled his rifle to him, looking through the powerful scope. The world jumped into close, clear view. He scanned the Viper team's position. He could see one man lying down, his leg wrapped in a crude bandage. Another was hunched over the radio. The leader was looking out over the edge, his weapon ready. They looked exhausted, moving slowly. They were conserving their last bits of energy, their last bullets. He then moved the scope to the enemy mortar team. He could see their faces. One was pointing at the ledge, calculating the distance. The other was holding a mortar round, ready to drop at .time was up. Guardian switched from his rifle to his laser designator. It looked like a bulky box with a lens. He pointed it across the massive gap, resting it on a rock to keep it steady. He pressed a button. An invisible beam of focused light, unseen by human eyes, shot out across the gorge and painted a perfect dot on the chest of the enemy soldier with the mortar round. Then he keyed his long-range radio. His voice was calm, low, and clear. There was no panic in it. It was the voice of a man stating facts. JOC, this is Guardian. I am in position. Eyes on Viper. I repeat, I have visual on all 4 men. They are on a ledge at my 2 o'clock. One is wounded, unable to walk. The enemy force is 15 to 20 men, positioned in a half-circle below them. The immediate threat is a mortar team. They are setting up to fire. I am marking the target now. I need immediate air support. Danger close. I say again, danger close. A voice, crackling but clear, came back from the Joint Operations Center 1,000 miles away. Guardian, JOC copies all. Stand by for aircraft. They are 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. The man with the mortar round was still holding it, talking to his friend. They were arguing about the angle. It was a small piece of luck, but it was something. Guardian kept the laser dot steady on the man's chest. He had to hold it perfectly still. If the dot wandered, the bomb would wander. He spoke into the radio again, this time on a frequency for the pilots now racing towards him. Stormbreaker flight, this is Guardian. I am your ground controller. I have a team in deep trouble. I need you to listen to my voice and do exactly as I say. We are going to work a very tight space. Are you ready? A new voice, cool and professional, filled his headset. Guardian, this is Stormbreaker 1. We read you. We're inbound with a full load. Paint the target and we'll light it up. The weight was the hardest part. He lay on the cold rock, his finger on the button, the invisible laser, his only thread connecting him to the mortar team. He could see the Viper team through his scope. The leader was now looking in his direction. Did he sense something? Did he know help was coming? Then a low rumble began to build in the clouds above. Not thunder. It was the deep, powerful growl of jet engines. The sound grew, shaking the air itself. On the enemy-held slope, the soldiers stopped. They looked up, confused. The man with the mortar round froze. Guardian's voice was a soft, steady command in the pilot's ears. Stormbreaker, Guardian. Laser is hot. Target is marked. You are cleared to engage. The response was instant. Guardian, Stormbreaker. Missile away. A few seconds later, a shape fell from the clouds. It was a dark sliver, moving faster than the eye could follow. It fell silently, following the invisible laser beam straight down. The world on the enemy's side of the mountain erupted in a flash of white light and a roar that hit Guardian like a physical punch. Even from a distance, the shockwave rolled across the gorge. Rocks, dirt, and debris bloomed into the air. Where the mortar team had been, there was now only smoke and a dark scar on the mountain. For a moment, there was a stunned silence on the battlefield below. Then, Guardian saw the Viper team's leader scramble to the edge of his ledge. He was looking right towards the needle. He raised a fist in the air, a single fierce pump of victory. They knew. They knew they were not alone anymore. Guardian allowed himself one short, sharp breath. Phase 1 was done. The mortar was gone. But the enemy soldiers were still there, now scrambling for cover, now looking for this new, unseen threat. The real fight was just beginning. He moved the laser designator, searching for the next target. The echo of the blast was still rolling through the mountains when the real work began. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Down on the main slope, the enemy soldiers were no longer hunters moving in for an easy kill. They were confused, scared men scrambling for cover, shouting to each other, looking up at the empty sky and the surrounding peaks for the source of the destruction. Guardian lay perfectly still on his cold perch. The shock from the bomb's impact had vibrated right through the rock beneath him. He ignored it. His eyes were glued to the scope of his rifle, scanning the chaotic scene below. He saw a group of 3 soldiers running towards a cluster of large boulders. Good cover. He switched his hand from the rifle to the laser designator, the heavy box still warm from use. He placed the invisible dot on the biggest rock in the center of the group. Stormbreaker 1 Guardian. New target. Group of infantry moving to cover. Laser is hot. The pilot's voice came back, cool as ice. Copy, Guardian. Painting target. Stand by. Another dark shape fell from the clouds. This one was smaller, faster. It wasn't a missile, but a precision-guided bomb. It shot down like a stone from heaven and hit the exact center of the laser dot. The explosion was different this time, sharper, more focused. The large boulder vanished in a cloud of pulverized stone. The men near it were thrown sideways like rag dolls. 2 did not get up. A grim calm settled over Guardian. There was no anger in it, no excitement. It was a terrible, mechanical focus. He was a craftsman, and the jets were his tools. His voice on the radio never changed. It was a flat, clear line of instruction. Good hit. Shift fire. See the gully to the north, the one that looks like a scar? Enemy moving there. Laser marking now. He moved the dot. Another bomb followed. The ground in the gully erupted in fire and dirt. From their tiny ledge, the Viper team watched the mountain below them come apart. The leader had pulled his men back tight against the rock wall. There was no celebrating now. This was danger close. The explosions were so near, they could feel the heat and the concussion in their chests. Rocks and debris from the impacts rattled down around them, clattering onto their ledge. The wounded medic had his hands over his ears, his eyes wide. The point man was grinning, a fierce, wild grin. That's for us. He kept saying, that's all for us. The leader didn't grin. He understood the precision, the risk. Someone out there, someone he couldn't see, was threading a needle with a sledgehammer. One mistake, one misheard number, and the bombs meant for the enemy would land right on top of them. He keyed his own radio, his voice rough. Guardian, this is Viper Leader. Your fire is effective, but it's very, very close. You copy? On the needle, Guardian heard him. He saw a group of enemy soldiers trying to flank around to the south, getting dangerously close to a ridge that led up towards Viper's position. If they reached it, They could shoot right up onto the ledge. "I copy, Viper," Guardian said, his tone still calm. "I see them. Stand by." He spoke to the pilot. "Stormbreaker, abort previous coordinate. New priority target. Southern Ridge Line. Infantry advancing. My position is the Needle. Viper's Ledge is 100 meters north of the impact point. I repeat, 100 meters. You must be precise." He could hear the tension in the pilot's voice now. 100 meters was nothing. It was the length of a football field. In the world of high explosives and fast jets, it was a hair's breadth. Guardian, confirm. 100 meters north of impact to friendlies. Is that correct? Affirmative, Stormbreaker. 100 meters. Laser is on the lead man. He must not reach that ridge. A long 3 seconds passed. Then, weapons away. This bomb came in at a shallower angle. It screened down the ridge line, a line of fire walking straight towards the advancing soldiers. The lead man, the one with Guardian's laser dot on his back, simply disappeared in the flash. The explosion tore along the ridge, scattering the others. The blast wave shot up the cliff face and washed over the Viper team's ledge. They ducked, feeling the wind and dust blast over them. A small rock slide followed. Tumbling past their spot dot, it was silent again. The enemy's organized assault was broken. The survivors were now hiding, pinned down, terrified of the invisible eye in the sky that called down thunder, but the danger wasn't over. One clever soldier, hiding behind a rock, had spotted a faint glint on the peak of the Needle. The sun had broken through the clouds for a moment, reflecting off a lens, maybe the scope, maybe the laser designator. He raised his rifle, aiming across the massive gap at the tiny figure. He could barely see. Guardian was scanning for the next target when he heard it. A sharp, high crack followed instantly by the spang of a bullet hitting rock 2 feet from his head. Stone chips stung his cheek. He dropped flat, his heart hammering. They had seen him. He was no longer a ghost. He was a target. He army crawled backwards, away from the edge. He couldn't use the laser now. Lifting his head to aim, it would get him killed. He grabbed his rifle. He had to return fire. He had to silence that shooter, or everything was over. He took a deep breath, edged to a different rock, and risked a quick look through his scope. He saw the muzzle flash first, from behind a gray boulder. The shooter was firing blind, hoping to get lucky. Guardian steadied his breathing. The wind was fierce. The distance was enormous, one of the longest shots imaginable. He calculated, adjusted his aim high and to the left. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The sound of his own rifle was loud in the lonely space. He watched through the scope. The enemy shooter's head jerked back. He fell out from behind the rock and did not move. Silence returned, deeper this time. The storm of bombs had stopped. The storm of bullets had stopped. The mountain was holding its breath. Guardian lay there for a moment, his cheek against the cold stone. Then he keyed his radio again. His voice sounded tired for the first time. "Jock, Guardian. Enemy assault is broken. They are pinned down. Airstrike is complete. Viper is intact. I say again, Viper is intact. We have a window. We need that extraction bird now." On the ledge, the leader heard the transmission. He looked at his men. The point man's grin was gone, replaced by a look of stark exhaustion. The medic was pale but awake. The comms man gave a thumbs up, his hands shaking. They had survived the hammer. Now, they just had to get off the anvil. The leader looked out across the gorge towards the Needle, though he could not see the man who had saved them. He keyed his mic. "Guardian, this is Viper Leader. We owe you one. We are ready to get off this rock." The silence after the last gunshot was the loudest sound Guardian had ever heard. It was a heavy, fragile silence, filled only with the whistle of the wind through the bullet-scarred rocks below. The enemy was broken, but they weren't gone. They were hiding, licking their wounds. The window for escape was open, but it wouldn't stay open for long. On his lonely perch, Guardian shifted, his muscles screaming in protest from hours of freezing stillness. He kept his rifle trained on the slope below, but his mind was already on the next, most dangerous step. Getting the helicopter in dot, his radio crackled. It was the calm, steady voice from the Joint Operations Center. Guardian, Jacques, extraction helicopter is inbound. Call sign Hayride, ETA 7 minutes. You are to guide them in for a hot extract at Viper's position. Then you are to exfiltrate yourself. Confirm. Guardian looked across the massive gap at the tiny ledge. A helicopter would be a big, slow, noisy target. The enemy still had rifles. One lucky shot could bring the whole rescue crashing down. JOC, Guardian confirms. 7 minutes. Tell Hayride this will be tight and fast. A standard hover won't work. They'll need to kiss the rock. He switched his radio to a new frequency, the one for the incoming pilot. Hayride, this is Guardian. Do you read? A new voice came back, clipped and all business. Guardian, Hayride reads you 5 by 5. We're coming in low and hot. Paint me a picture. All right, listen close, Guardian said, his eyes scanning the terrain. Viper is on a ledge about the size of 2 trucks on the east face of the peak. There are enemy survivors scattered in the rocks due south and west, about 200 meters down. They are scared, but they are armed. You cannot approach from below. You have to come from the north, drop down the chimney of that big gorge, and flare hard to the east, putting the bulk of the mountain between you and the enemy positions as you land. You will have about 10 seconds of exposed hover. The wind is gusting from the west, about 20 knots. It will push your tail. You copy? There was a pause as the pilot processed the complex instructions. Copy all, Guardian. North approach, down the gorge, flare east. 10-second exposed window. Wind from the west. We'll be ready. Now Guardian had to talk to Viper. Viper leader, Guardian. The bird is 7 minutes out. You will hear it. When I give the word, you pop green smoke right in the center of your ledge. Do not do it early. It will tell every hidden shooter exactly where you are. When the helo comes in, you move fast. You're wounded first. Leave everything but your weapons and your man. You load in 10 seconds, or we all fail. Understood? From the ledge, the leader's voice was thick with fatigue, but sharp with focus. Understood, Guardian. Green smoke on your mark. Wounded first. 10 seconds. The wait began. 7 minutes. It felt longer than the entire climb up the needle. Guardian scanned the enemy positions. He saw movement. A head peeking over a rock. A man crawling. They were regrouping. They knew what the silence meant, too. They knew a rescue would come. Guardian Hayride. 3 minutes out. Starting our run. Copy, Hayride. Stand by for smoke. He could hear it now. A faint, throbbing beat in the distance, growing steadily. The sound of rotor blades chewing the thin air. It was the sound of hope, and it was also a giant alarm bell for every enemy on the mountain. He saw 2 soldiers stand up, raising their rifles towards the sound. Guardian didn't hesitate. He squeezed off 2 quick shots from his rifle. The bullets snapped over their heads, kicking up dirt. The men dove back down. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it might make them hesitate for a few crucial seconds. The helicopter sound became a roar. Then Guardian saw a dark, sleek MH-6OM Black Hawk appearing like a ghost from the northern gorge. It moved with terrifying speed, descending in a controlled dive. The pilot was a master, following Guardian's instructions perfectly. "Now, Vapor!" "Pop smoke. Now!" Guardian yelled into the radio. On the ledge, the comms man pulled the pin on a green smoke canister and rolled it to the center. Thick, vivid green smoke immediately billowed up, caught by the wind, and whipped into a swirling column. The helicopter pilot saw it. He flared the aircraft hard, the nose coming up, the tail swinging around. The powerful downdraft from the rotors hit the ledge, exploding the green smoke into a wild emerald cyclone. For a moment, the whole scene was hidden in a green fog. "Go, go!" Guardian heard the Viper leader screaming, his voice lost in the rotor wash. Through his scope, Guardian saw shapes moving in the smoke. 2 men carrying a third between them, stumbling towards the gray shape of the helicopter. A 4th man backing towards it, his weapon pointed outwards. They moved like men in a dream, fighting against the brutal wind from the rotors. Then they were in. The crew chief at the door gave a wild wave, but the helicopter didn't leave. It stayed there in its dangerous, exposed hover. Guardian's heart dropped into his stomach. "Hayride, what are you doing?" "Get out of there. Go." The pilot's voice came back, calm. "Guardian, we're not leaving a man behind. We're coming to you. Be ready with the rope." The Black Hawk pulled away from the ledge, banking sharply. It wasn't flying away to safety. It was turning towards the needle. It was coming for him. There was no time to argue. No time to feel anything. The helicopter moved towards his tiny peak. It couldn't land. There was no space. It would have to hover again, and the needle was even more exposed. The helicopter slid into position, its side door facing Guardian's perch. The wind was chaos, a hurricane of noise and pressure. He saw the crew chief, hooked to a safety line inside, heave a thick, coiled fast rope out the door. It fell, whipping in the wind, its end dancing just above the rocks. Guardian didn't wait for it to settle. He slung his rifle, took 3 running steps, and jumped. He caught the rope in midair, his gloves gripping with a fierce, desperate strength. The moment he had his hold, he gave a sharp tug. The crew chief felt it. "He's on." "Go, go, go." The helicopter lurched upward, pulling Guardian off the rock. One moment his boots were on stone, the next he was dangling in open air, 1,000 feet of nothing below him. The mountain fell away, shrinking beneath his spinning feet. He was being dragged through the sky, the cold air tearing at him, the rope twisting. Hands grabbed him. Strong hands, hauling him roughly into the warm, loud, crowded darkness of the helicopter cabin. He fell onto the floor next to the 4 men from Viper Team. For a second, they all just looked at each other, breathless, deafened, covered in dirt and sweat. The wounded medic reached out a shaking hand. Guardian grabbed his forearm in a solid grip. No words were spoken. None were needed. The point man just nodded, his eyes closed in exhausted relief. The leader gave Guardian a long, slow look and placed a fist over his heart. The crew chief slammed the door shut, closing out the screaming wind. The interior was suddenly quieter, just the deep thrum of the engines. The helicopter banked hard, putting the mountain peak behind them, racing for the safety of the distant valleys. Guardian sat back against the vibrating wall, finally letting his head drop. The mission was over. The team was safe. The silence in the helicopter wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was the sound of men breathing, of hearts slowing down, of a job, an impossible job, finally done.